Well, good morning. Good morning and welcome all to the Sunday morning service from the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Laguna Beach. My name is Pamela Flodman and I will be serving as your worship associate for today. And today we are delighted to welcome Reverend Stefanie Etzbach-Dale to our virtual pulpit as our guest minister, and also thanking Reverend Stefanie for bringing that uplifting up music to us to get the service started this morning. Reverend Stefanie served as our minister at UUFLB from 2006 to 2008. Now affiliated with the UU Church of Palo Alto in Northern California, she works as a spiritual director focusing on building spiritual courage and resilience through private spiritual direction sessions, group retreats, workshops, public speaking, art, and a very active social media ministry. So welcome to you, Reverend Stefanie. The title of today's service is Standard Shifts. As humans, we are deeply complex beings. And I often worry that I may have only a very surface understanding of all of the currents that underlie the daily lives of my family members, friends, colleagues, all who share this planet with us. And yet in the midst of all of this complexity, we can also have a strong desire to have clarity and really a uniformity around who is a villain and who is a hero. In her description of this service, Reverend Stefanie writes that the growth of cancel culture is bringing the need for this clarity to the forefront. Recent examples are the taking down of Confederate statues and the movement to ban or at least stop publishing some of Dr. Seuss's works. So today we will be challenging ourselves to take a new look at ourselves and these current cultural trends. At UUFLB, we are a welcoming congregation. Whoever you are, whomever you love, no matter your age or gender, your economic or immigration status, the color of your skin, or whatever sincere questions that you bring with you today, we welcome you. As Unitarian Universalists, we have 7 principles which we hold as strong values and moral guides as we build religious community together. When I was thinking about the theme for today's service, it really seemed to me that each of these 7 principles touch on this challenge of searching for clarity while acknowledging complexity. But I guess the principle which stood out for me most is the 4th principle. As a Unitarian Universalist congregation, we affirm and promote a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Now, this search is not always easy, so I am looking forward this morning to facing these challenges together with this beloved community. Our fellowship is served by our minister, Reverend Lee Marie Sanchez, who leads us in worship on one Sunday each month and also joins us on many other Sundays, and for the many events that occur each week, including our Friday Zoom at noon discussion group. So I encourage you to look for Reverend Lee Marie's email messages, alerting us to opportunities that we have to engage in the work of our congregation, in our local community, and in the broader community. Generosity and action are the keys by which we can make a difference in the world. So thank you all. Each Sunday, anywhere there is a service held in a Unitarian Universalist congregation, a chalice is lit. The flaming chalice is the symbol of our faith. Today, our guest minister, Reverend Stefanie Etzbach-Dale, will be leading our chalice lighting with the chalice lighting words. And if you have a candle at home, you may wish to light it together with us now.
To combat the darkness that lurks in our midst, we promise our hearts and our minds to untwist. We pledge to hold true to what's good and what's right, for our lives are the candles that bring the best light. Good morning and welcome. It is so good to be with you again. As we enter our time together, I invite you to take a few relaxed breaths in and out, setting aside for this hour worries, plans, thoughts of things left undone, and just allow yourself to settle into your seat wherever you are, to relax your shoulders, your jaw, your neck, your belly, as we all become more fully present to the embrace and call of this community, embedded within a faith tradition that draws from a wide array of wisdom traditions, including some that might seem unconventional. Along those lines, I share with you now our opening words, our centering words by Dr. Seuss, inspired by Dr. Seuss. In the back of the mind, where our thoughts are piled high, among jumbles of memories and questions like why, can be found, if we listen and look really well, some clues to the mysteries our grandparents tell. While we're about it, determined to know what makes us humans feel hope, joy, and woe, we turn to the stories, so many, so fine, that nourish the spirit, the heart, and the mind. Some in our scriptures, the old and revered, revealing great love and what's to be feared. Others are told by the poets of time, philosophers seeking a truth so sublime. Today, in our quest to learn more of what's true, we turn to cartoons painted yellow and blue. We turn to the work of a man named of Seuss, familiar to all as a bottle of juice. So settle on in as our bowl now is struck. Prepare to be Seusselled. What joy and what luck.
Good morning,
Our
everyone.
opening hymn is number 368. Now let us sing. Although you will be muted from home, please join our amazing and talented music director, Carole, in singing, and the words will be in the chat. Now let us sing.
Good morning again.
Thank you so much, Carole. As we gather today from our homes for worship, let us take a moment to remind ourselves why we come together as community. I invite you to read these words together when and if it feels right for you. Please unmute your microphone. It is powerful to join our voices together, even when we're joining them together from our homes. So please join me in reading the words on your screens. May we
be reminded here of our highest aspirations and inspired by our gifts of love and service
the
on the altar of humanity.
May we
know once again
that we are
we're
not
not isolated beings,
but
but connected in mystery and miracle
to the
to the
universe,
earth,
this
this community,
and
and
to each
to
other.
each other.
We have now come to a time in our service to briefly share the important events that have touched our lives in the past week. We value this fellowship as a sharing community where our joys are amplified, and a caring community where our sorrows can be lessened. During this time of sharing our joys and concerns, we will be pausing the recording, joys and sorrows, so much that our connection with our friends, our families, and pets and wildlife that are part of our lives, that brings both the joy of connections and of seeing new life in the spring, the challenges as we meet up with friends perhaps after a long while and recognize changes that occur over time. Let us hold all of these joys and concerns, the cares of our congregation, both those that have been spoken this morning and also those which are unspoken. Let us hold these in our hearts and our minds in the coming week and draw on the strength that we give to one another as we share our joys, lighten each other's burdens, and care for each other in community. It is as much a blessing to be able to give as it is to receive. In this self-governing, self-sustaining community, we recognize that it is our responsibility to do both, and it is our responsibility to do both well. Our fellowship depends on the love and the generous contributions from our members, and we are empowered by the innumerable gifts of those who join in covenant with us. These gifts have been especially obvious to me over the past year. These gifts include service, trust, collaboration, patience, a lot of patience, humor, compassion, curiosity, time, and also the gift of financial contribution, which allows the fellowship to meet its financial commitments. All of our gifts generously given are needed for this fellowship and for its continued good work in the world. So the information on your screen provides 2 ways in which you can give. And this information is also available in the email message which you received with the link to join the service this morning. Again, it is as much a blessing to be able to give as it is to receive. So thank you all.
During this next part of the worship service, we create space for each person to connect with their own lived experience. We call this the time of meditation. So I invite you now to be attentive to that, attentive to your body, unique in its shape and form, its abilities and needs, its dislikes and likes. Your precious body, the gift of your ancestors, right now situated wherever you happen to be. Just notice. Breath flowing in and out, heart beating, most likely without any conscious direction of your own. Your body is wise and generous in its determination and ability to keep you safe and nourished and to bring you joy. Take another few breaths and allow yourself, if you will, to smile in recognition of and gratitude for the experience of being exactly who you are in relationship with life, varied and abundant. In just a moment, we'll be pausing the recording, and a link to the video that we'll be showing will be posted. Meanwhile, keep breathing, keep noticing. Unitarian Universalism draws from a wide array of wisdom traditions. We can find wisdom in so many places. Welcome back. The last time I shared worship with you was just about a year ago, the first Sunday after COVID lockdown. As it turned out, I was in Laguna Beach for a family event, but that week ended up being the very first time any of us were faced with the need to make radical changes to what had long been taken for granted, the ability to gather in person. When I was invited to be with you again today, virtually, I was moved to think about the many, many other changes that have taken place this year and in recent years, many of which I hadn't ever imagined to be on the horizon. All of this got me thinking about stories I read a few years back about some of Dr. Seuss's books being pulled from libraries. And more recently, the story of a publisher deciding to stop publishing several of those books. When I first read about that, it was from the perspective of people outraged that something like that could ever happen to a hero of children. So many of us learned to read because of his books. Most everyone recognizes his distinctive rhymes and characters. In more than one Unitarian Universalist congregation, I've heard Dr. Seuss proudly claimed as someone who actively promoted UU values, with sayings like, "Only you can control your future," and "A person is a person no matter how small." It's not hard to see why. The media circus around the suggested pulling of his books presented the situation as yet another example of cancel culture, of liberals throwing the baby out with the bathwater, the good with the bad. The fact is, like many of those who achieve hero status, and even like many of those of us who don't, Theodore Geisel, Dr. Seuss's real name, was not perfect. Far from it. In the course of his lifetime, he was not consistent in his application of UU values. I was shocked to discover that as a young man during World War II, he bought into and promoted many politically racist perspectives through his cartoons. I ended up tying that disheartening, usually not spoken of piece of history into a sermon on redemption. I talked about how his perspectives had changed over time and how he ended up writing and dedicating Horton Hears a Who to a Japanese friend after having created so many derogatory cartoons featuring Japanese characters. He had learned something. He had shifted perspective. He had redeemed himself. There was a happy ending after all. As it turns out, the publisher's decision to pull some of his books recently was about economics, not about protest. Apparently, there were a few books of his that just weren't bestsellers, so they got pulled. Reflecting on all of this was a powerful experience for me, an opportunity to grapple with human susceptibility to racism, and to think about what's really needed in order to grow into our values. I saw a bit of redemption in the trajectory of his life, and that gave me hope, not only for myself, but also for our society. Now, fast forward a few years, and we are right back in the middle of heated discussions about cancel culture and about the persistence of racist attitudes and violence, notably increasing towards those of Asian descent ever since COVID. While no one has recently organized boycotts of Dr. Seuss's work, he has been getting a lot more attention lately. He's been linked with the negative aspects of cancel culture. So it seems high time, I think, to revisit this issue by asking, what is cancel culture? As I understand it, it is a backlash against movements to hold people and institutions accountable for their transgressions, for the things that they do to cause harm to others. A lot of people resent that call to accountability. They say that those transgressions were in the past. They took place within a culture that didn't see them as such. So lighten up. They draw attention only to the benign or positive aspects of history, saying that it's less than noble parts. We're interwoven with worthy and honorable attributes and actions. So we shouldn't talk about all that ugly stuff that happened. So here are some examples. Confederate symbols in public spaces. Now, they were intended back in the day, apparently, to serve as nothing more than reminders of noble and heroic deeds. But from today's perspective, we know better. They are directly and inextricably linked with the subjugation and suffering of enslaved people. Now, more and more people recognize them as shameful and painful reminders of a past whose effects are still very evident today. Many liberals want them removed, want them destroyed, in fact. They want stories of the heroic South rewritten to reflect the villainy. Another example is when we confront the fact that previously beloved public figures like Bill Cosby and Matt Lauer and Governor Cuomo are being held accountable. Thanks to the Me Too movement and subsequent rising intolerance of racial and sexual improprieties, they have discovered that fame will no longer protect them as it once did. Actions are being scrutinized now that were not before. Statues are being toppled. Flags are being torn down. Lawsuits are being filed, to which the liberal in me says, finally, it's about time. Change things up. Come on. But the term cancel culture is a way of criticizing this new-ish tendency to not excuse bad behavior, to draw attention to it, to create clear boundaries between what is tolerable and what is not. And I move to say, what's the problem with that? Isn't it about time that we be held up to our proclaimed standards? Well, the problem has to do with focus, with what we pay attention to and what we ignore. Those who cry cancel culture don't want anything to change. They say that liberals are throwing the baby out with the bathwater. They are changing too much, which may have some truth to it. But what I feel moved to focus on is the fact that those who cry cancel culture generally hold privilege. They are generally the ones who haven't had to suffer racist or sexist ideologies and expressions. Cancel culture is generally the cry of people who have not learned the hard way to fear the presence of Confederate flags or the seemingly innocuous misogyny woven into our culture, into the very institutions we take for granted. As a white person with such privilege, it has been easy enough for a long time for me to focus on the beautiful design of a Robert E. Lee statue in a public square, or the poignancy of all of those Confederate memorial plaques. It's been easy enough for me to justify their existence by pointing out that they should remain because, well, isn't it heartless to overlook, to negate the grief that war generates? But if we pay attention, we realize that's not the only story those statues and plaques tell. Stories of heroism and of the grief of Confederate families who lost their sons to war. There are subtexts directly linked to the atrocities of our time. What I mean to share with you today is that it's important to recognize and cultivate a heart for the other stories, the ones we may not really want to know about. Back to Dr. Seuss. Why make a fuss over him now? Because he, as a young man, drew Asian and African American people and Jewish people as stereotypes with exaggerated features, because he spoke only in the binary of male and female and girls and boys. Wasn't he just a product of his time? Didn't he ultimately redeem himself? Those who have not been the victim of cultural violence might say that, won't get it, won't see it. They'll lash out at those very people who have been victimized in such ways, who face such danger every day, who are calling out in pain and for help even unto their very last breath. That's called gaslighting. When someone says, ouch, and the response is, how dare you? Or even more pressure on the neck. To complicate matters, there can also be a rush to judgment, or even the desire to censure people who have what has become an unpopular political belief. The McCarthy era illustrated that quite well. Other historical tactics have been to remove undesirable people from public view, from military service, and even the entertainment field, for being gay, for example, or non-binary, for looking different, for holding unpopular political or religious beliefs. These days, we all are becoming aware of a whole other area ripe with ethical and moral implications. As we consider how to reconcile our desire for safety with those among us who claim it is their right not to vaccinate, despite the impact that will have on others, the likely pain and suffering. Over 550,000 deaths in this country alone so far since I was last with you 1 year ago this month. Countless hearts forever broken. There are subtexts. There are invisible characters and dramas in every story, in every lived experience, in every body. So there is, as I've said, the possibility of redemption by looking at things differently than we're used to. No longer promoting or tolerating attitudes and behaviors that don't align with our proclaimed values. And there are the cries of cancel culture. Jewish tradition affirms that the key to redemption is found in its teachings, and particularly in the actions we take in response to those teachings. The mitzvot that make us partners with God, co-creators, uniting, healing all the disjointed pieces of existence. This month, Christians celebrated Holy Week, the death and resurrection of Jesus, through whom, according to believers, redemption can be found when we emulate his love and forgiveness, his prophetic outrage and generosity. Which leads me to revisit my own ideas about redemption, guided in part by this quote from Dr. Seuss, who said, "You'll miss the best things if you keep your eyes shut." I was shocked when I learned of the racist cartoons Dr. Seuss published when he was young. I had this experience of what they call cognitive dissonance. I was like, wait, what? He drew that? The same person who wrote, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing's going to get better. It's not. It was similar to the moment I learned about Mahatma Gandhi's racism and sexism. Gandhi, really? My hero? Or when I learned about local heroes, pillars of the community who embezzle or commit adultery. There are so many ugly, disjointed parts of our evolving history that get pushed into the shadows because everyone wants a happy ending. Because human beings need to believe that virtue is possible, that it is achievable. The privileged don't want to acknowledge the ugly that human beings have inflicted, have institutionalized, and are perpetuating still in so many ways. We don't want to see the cruelty from which privilege rises. We don't want to be reminded of that, especially if the privilege is ours, and yet it's there. Even when privileged eyes are shut tight against it, which act is in and of itself a privilege. To be able to shut your eyes, to be able to not look at the ugly is in and of itself privilege. The ugly is there, right alongside the beautiful, the noble, and the virtuous. It is molten into those Confederate statues and plaques, woven into those flags, and seemingly innocuous societal mores that make it far more likely leniency will be given to white folks accused of criminal behavior than, you get the point. You'll miss the best things if you keep your eyes shut, Dr. Seuss wrote. But first, I say, you are likely to see some things you don't want to. And redemption, I've come to believe, requires foremost that we not look away, that we not erase those things that remind us how complex and inconsistent and in process we human beings are. That we not deny or hit the cancel button on the furthest edges of those lesser known stories that do so much to highlight the fact that we have not yet figured out how to live up to our ideals. Not individually, not collectively, not yet. So much is changing. So, what is required these days? I've come to believe it is a willingness to shift focus on a dime, a willingness to change and be changed from one day to the next, as we had to do last year, when it became clear we couldn't do things the old way anymore. Shift focus, just do it, learn, adapt, make mistakes, risk. Just do it. Pay attention to what's needed in the moment, right now. What's needed by the most vulnerable among us. Do it so we, all of us, have a fighting chance of making it through all of this. That's what this year has been about. How it used to be is not how it is anymore, is one of the lessons I take from this past year. It can't be the way that it used to be. Also, don't take for granted anything we are told about the truth of our history or history in the making or what happens next. This year taught me we really have to pay attention to who is telling the stories, to what their motivations are and what the impact might be. Whose stories aren't being told or believed? We need to know that sometimes, as our friend Dr. Seuss once said, the questions can be complicated and the answers simple. They really can be. One answer is to not look away, to get comfortable with our own discomfort when we are made to recognize a dissonance between our values and our actions, individual and collective. That means, among other things, watching the Derek Chauvin murder trial, not looking away. It means that we not destroy evidence of our modeled history. Those statues of Confederate heroes absolutely need to be taken out of public spaces where they continue to traumatize large portions of the population while empowering other portions of the population to violence against them. They need to be taken down and put into museums where the heroics, the sacrifices of those individuals can be presented in the larger context of villainous white supremacy culture, a context of untold, ongoing violence, as well as heroics and sacrifices. That's my 2 cents about that. Redemption is, if anything, a process. Growing into our values takes time, but it requires foremost that we gauge our actions against those values again and again and again. And when we see something incongruent, that we not mask or deny or hide or cancel it. Because that choice is, in and of itself, proof of unearned privilege. Dr. Seuss, not the hero I once thought he was, taught me nonetheless that in all things, humility and curiosity are called for. The ability to shift perspective, own up to our lesser inclinations and to the damage we've done or contributed to, no matter our intention. The ability to draw out the invisible stories, to see the bigger picture and believe in our individual and collective ability to grow into our values, whether we call that redemption or not. This year's lesson is know what you stand for. Don't look away. Take it all in and know that the trajectory of your life and of this nation is yet to be determined. Don't look away. Choose well. Blessed be.
Thank you, Reverend Stefanie. Much to think about. Our closing hymn this morning is number 396. I know this rose will open. The words will shortly be in the chat, and please join Carole in singing, I know this rose will open.
I know
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we will carry in our hearts until we are together again.
Each life is a blessing, a chance to choose well from among all the choices, though it's oft hard to tell which ones are reflective of what's true and what's good. So judge not another till you've stood where they've stood, or at least offer kindness to those you may meet at the playground, the office, the mirror, or street. Learning can happen. It's seldom too late to make up for past wrongs and change up our fate. Redemption's so near, it's a heartbeat away. So consider the options and have a great day.
Let there be peace on earth, and let it begin with me. Let there be peace on earth, the peace was meant to be. With earth as our mother, we are family. Let us walk with each other, perfect harmony. Let peace begin with me. Let this be the moment now. With every step I take, let this be my solid vow. Take each moment, live each moment in peace eternally. Let there be peace on earth. Let it begin with me. Have a lovely day, everybody.